welcome to Expressions. I'm Julie Robbins. We're inside the Gilcrease Museum in Tulsa, where we're going to be taking a tour of the Mass of the Northwest Coast. There's a lot to see today, so stay tuned. Our guest today is Peter McNair. Peter, thank you for being on the program today. And I'm going to let you explain your involvement with this exhibit.
Okay, well, for more than 30 years, I was curator of anthropology at the Royal British Columbia Museum in Victoria, Canada. And following my retirement, I was approached by the Vancouver Art Gallery to do an exhibit of Northwest Coast masks. And Brooks Joyner, the director of the Gilcrease, was formerly there at the Vancouver Art Gallery, knew of the connections, came to see the exhibit, and...
Say, hey, we want you at Gilcrease, right?
Exactly.
Well, let's start with this piece behind us here. And I know as we walk through this exhibit, each one has a story behind it, right? Each mask means something different. And there are many masks that we're going to look at today, but let's talk about this.
Well, this is what the Kwakwaka'wakw tribe call a cannibal bird mask, and there are actually three birds involved. The major bird, of course, has this extended curve above its nose. It's called the crooked beak of heaven, and there's one facing forward that's called a hohok, and a smaller one facing backwards, which is the supernatural raven. And these inhabit, so legend says, the middle heavens, and in times past they used to come down and threaten humankind on this world. And heroes go off and eventually subdue the birds and reenact their confrontation with them in a dance where performers wear masks such as these. The lower jaws are articulated, so at certain times they snap shut, and they're open and shut very rapidly.
So down to each little detail, well, it means something,
yes.
Right? Wow. And now these are different tribes of Native Americans, is that correct?
Yes, we say that there are 11 nations, linguistic groups as the anthropologists call them, on the coast, Pacific coast, ranging from northern Washington state through British Columbia and into southeastern Alaska. And of those nations, there are a number of subgroups or tribes, as they like to call themselves.
Right. Well, let's move on this way and see what else we have to look at.
Well, every exhibit has to have a signature image, one that appears in its advertising, and this is really quite a spectacular mask from the Nuuk Nation.
Oh, it certainly is.
And it represents the sun. The sort of storyline of the exhibit involves examining the four parts of the cosmos that the Northwest Coast Indians identify: the sky world, the undersea world, the mortal world, and finally the spirit world. And the Nuuk believe that in the high heavens lives the sun, and at one time, at the beginning of time, he sent down four carpenters to this earth to assist emerging humankind in learning the arts and crafts of making canoes, houses, baskets, capes. These carpenters also taught people how to fish and otherwise exploit.
So all the necessities, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so those four carpenters, of course, are arranged around the corona of the sun, and you see their little faces and hands on either side. And contained within the mask, then, is the essence of the belief system.
And the four carpenters are here displayed also in the individual masks? Is that what these are around us here?
No, the ones that we now look at deal with the other worlds. So that was the sky world. This one with the copper forehead, eyes, or eyebrows, and eyes, is a creature, a sea monster that lives under the sea. And it threatens seafaring folk. It causes sudden storms, tide rips, causes uncharted reefs to appear, and can swallow entire canoes full of inhabitants.
Now tell me, when would they bring this particular mask out? When they see an enemy coming? Is that what?
No, it's all involved in ceremony, and there's a dancing ritual called the potlatch, and one after the other these masks appear on the dance floor, and they're of course very much animated when worn with the associated costume. And they're all part of an ancient family history. So in times past, an ancestor would have had an encounter with a sea monster and survived it, and then assumed the sea monster as an image, as a crest, you might say.
I see, and the mask is the prize type thing representing that. I see. Now let's take a look at the more evil one, I should say, next to it.
Yes, this represents a character called the Bokkus. He's about half the size of a human, but can leap through the woods with 20-foot bounds, and he's chief of the ghosts. And if you're lost in the woods and come across a little green guy, don't accept the food that he offers you. It would appear to be salmon, but when you swallow it, it is actually rotten wood, which he consumes from the forest floor. And when you swallow that food, you die and become a ghost. And I have a mask here in my hand that represents another version of the Bokkus, the green, somewhat skeletal face. And there are branches when this is worn that give it a further wonderful sense and feeling. And the artists always carve the insides quite wonderfully so that it fits the face, and there's a strap, of course, that goes around it that holds it on the face of the dancer. And we can see them hanging on the wall in the exhibit case, but they achieve considerable animation when the dancer moves and looks around. And it's a skilled dancer that brings real life to these pieces. The fourth world is the mortal world, and some of these creatures like grizzly bears and thunderbirds, eagles, and the like, ultimately transformed into humans. So the mask we're looking at now is a Tlingit piece from southeastern Alaska, and it in all probability represents a human ancestor that transformed from one of those creatures. And so it characterizes what we call the mortal world, this world that we live in. There are also supernatural creatures in that world.
Okay, Peter, I've noticed with each room that we go into, the lighting is really dark, of course, other than on the mask. Is that intentional?
Yes, indeed. The masks would be shown in a big community house that accommodates as many as 1,000 people with a fire in the middle. And the drama of the firelit pieces, the house is otherwise dark. And we've tried to recreate that sense in the exhibit. We've also put the masks at various angles to suggest again that they were in use. And these ones show noble women with a lip plug, or labrette as it's called, in the lower lip.
And, what is the purpose of that?
This is an indicator of high rank, nobility, and sort of honored age. And the masks represent an ancestress called Eagle Woman, who was the founder of the Eagle clan for the Haida people who live on the Queen Charlotte Islands, otherwise known as Haida Gwaii today. And there are Haida people in southeastern Alaska as well.
Wow.
But when a young girl reaches puberty, her lower lip is pierced, and a very small training labrette of bone or metal is placed in there. And as she grows older, an increasingly larger plug of wood is placed in.
Oh, goodness.
And it's not really an unusual practice. I was downtown Tulsa last night, and I saw a lot of people with hardware like that in their lower lip.
They didn't know. It's part of history, right? Now tell me real quickly, just about this piece back here. Did they actually try to put some human hair on masks? Or?
Yes, and we'll see some later on. And this is a contemporary piece. We don't distinguish between the very old ethnographic pieces and the contemporary works made by living artists. And he's just playing around with the idea of beautiful, exotic woman when he's done this. It's quite different and distinct.
It's very nice. All of these. It takes a lot of talent to do this. I mean, these people didn't go to art school, right?
They served a very rigorous apprenticeship under established artists, so they have earned their stripes.
Right.
And represented are about 35 contemporary living artists out of more than 600 who practice in British Columbia, Alaska, and Washington State. So we have the leading artists represented.
And this is quite a different type of mask here.
There are only 2 masks made of stone known for the Northwest Coast tribes to accomplished pieces anyway. And this comes from the village of Kitkatla on the central coast. And they're Coast Tsimshian people. It's pecked with others with a hard stone from a piece of basalt. And there's a little bit of paint that's been rubbed in, or pigment. You can see that the eye sockets are kind of green and the lips and the ears are red. It's very heavy, but it was actually worn. There are holes in the back to which rigging was attached.
My goodness.
And its mate looks exactly the same, with the exception that the eyes are pierced through in that case.
Okay, Peter, we're back to the wooden mask. We just came from the stone mask. Where are we headed now?
Yes, we're entering the mortal world, the land that's familiar to us, that we live in. And while the stone mask is a great and ancient piece, as far as documentation is concerned, this mask, collected in 1778, is the oldest that we know on exhibit. And it was collected by the intrepid English explorer, Captain Cook, as he, on his third voyage around the world, explored the North Pacific coast. We don't know what it means. He wasn't able, of course, to communicate very in any depth with the Native Americans that he met. It's made of red cedar, and it has a slight sort of rosy tint to it. There's been some color or pigment added.
Wow, what a wonderful discovery, right?
Yes.
What else do we have to look at in this part?
Well, one of the three curators involved was the Native American chief Robert Joseph. And while we researched the exhibit, we found and selected this mask, which represents a woman giving birth. And there's a long sort of tableau in which eventually two children appear from under her blanket, and she gives birth. And we found a photograph taken in 1946 that shows this very same mask. And in the background is a little boy wearing a dark mask, and it indeed is Robert Joseph, and his mother stands behind him, guiding him as he went around the dance floor. And he recalled that event, and it was just a wonderful connection.
How strange, looking at a picture, it's like, that's me in there, right?
In 1946. Yeah.
Well, let's move on to another. What area are we going to look at now?
We're going to look into the sky world now. And of course, there are the celestial objects in the highest heavens, the moon, the stars, and the sun, and they're such masks.
Oh, this is a very impressive room.
And these are cannibal bird masks of the type that we saw in the entryway. And when the performer enters the dance floor, he's standing up, but he then goes into a squatting position and is finally seated on the floor. And so the three levels, effectively, that you see of these cannibal bird masks represent the way in which they would be seen. And we had two experts from the Native American community, Robert Joseph and Chief Henry Seaweed, who set this platform up. So the masks are in exactly the aspect or the angle that you would see during the course of a dance. And I think they really enliven the exhibit.
Oh, they certainly do.
And really are successful in contextualizing the dance. And there were the three significant birds, the one with a very long beak called a hohok that uses its beak to crack open men's skulls and eat their brains.
Oh.
One with a shorter beak, a supernatural raven that plucks the eyeballs out of its human prey. And finally, the crooked beak of heaven with this long sweeping arc above its upper jaw. And in some cases, it's also reflected on the lower jaw too. Well, while the focus of the exhibit is on masks, we have to realize that they appear in context. And really what we're dealing with is an amazing theater, and it's the movement of the performer, and in fact the movement of the mask, the fact that many of them transform, that cause awe and amazement in the audience. So this mask begins all folded up, closed, and it represents a raven with its long beak. The raven then splits open to reveal a second bird, one with an orange beak and a large sort of plume extending behind it, and that's the thunderbird, which when it ruffles its feathers, it causes the rumble of thunder, and when it blinks its eyes, lightning comes shooting down. And then the thunderbird opens to reveal an eagle with the yellow beak. So these three birds are birds that are owned as privilege by the owner. And when finally the eagle splits, It reveals the owner himself. This is modeled after the actual owner of the mask, a chief living today, and his visage is shown inside. And this is a great example of the full costume, and this is why I say it's so dramatic, so theatrical, the presentation. And when this is closed, again, it shows a raven. But when the manipulated strings are pulled, it opens up to reveal the face of a sun inside in human form. And the yellow eye sockets indicate the sun, and then there's sort of a circle of yellow design that completes the impression of sun.
And so this is how, one of the examples of how they would look while they're dancing, right?
Exactly. And of course, there is dancing associated with this performance, or the exhibit, and you'll see dancers wearing masks, perhaps some very much like this, that open and transform. I'm not going to give all the secrets of the performance away, but the drama and of the contextualization will be shown by the troupe.
With us now is Simon Dick, and Simon, you're the leader of a group of dancers from British Columbia, and the dance group is called what now? What's the name?
A Clapham.
Okay, and like we said, we're from British Columbia. We're going to be seeing dances today.
Yeah.
All include some exotic masks.
This is how we depict through traditional theater and drama that the families who have the rights to these dances are taught their lineage and their rights and privileges through traditional ceremonies such as what we're going to see today.
Why don't you tell us about the first one? I believe it's called the Cannibal Dance.
Yeah, it's the cannibal dance, and the first mask that you'll see is the spirit of the cannibal, a cannibal bird believed to fly down from the skies and crack open the skulls of human beings and devour their brains.
Oh my goodness, now there's going to be a lot of children viewing this, so we're going to be all right, aren't we?
I'm sure.
Okay. And what about the last one?
The last one does not only represent the evolution of our first peoples, but related to the flood story. When the earth was covered with water, there stood on a mountaintop Qulus, a close relative to the thunderbird, who transformed by taking off his beak and his wings and his claws and transformed into a human, and married the oldest daughter of Tseqamet, who survived the flood, and starting a new tribe of people.
Hi, Peter.
Hi.
I really enjoyed those dances. They were great.
They're great, great artists, great performers, and they're former soccer players, so they go into a long warm-up to get lithe and
So they're
spry and
fit.
ready to dance, yeah.
Well, it's nice to see the masks actually in action, right? Now, what kind of mask do we have here?
Well, this is a nice little suite, and these are the same character that we looked at earlier. The book, of course, this is the counterpart among the Haida Indians, and the central one is a very important mask made by a great artist named Charles Edenshaw, and he produced jewelry, carvings in argillite, and ceremonial pieces. And this represents the Gagit, which is the Haida version of that wild spirit of the woods, the chief of the ghosts. And very interestingly, his two great grandsons are represented in this same case with their own versions of the same mask. So the one on my right is the work of Robert Davidson, who's one of the foremost and most internationally renowned Haida artists. And his brother, Reg, is represented by this piece. And if you're washed overboard on a canoe and finally make it to shore in a stupefied position or condition, you follow a light into the forest, and eventually you are transformed into, again, a sort of ghost-like creature, lose all human facility and have to eat spiny fish that you catch raw. in the tide pools, and so the spines penetrating the lips of this mask represent that condition, that dissociated condition that is caused by the power of the Gigit.
Peter, these masks are a lot larger than the ones we've been looking at.
Yes, and the dancer has to hold it from the inside and manipulate it with his hands that are attached to handles underneath. And these represent the mythic ancestors, the founders of a group of people who live on northern Vancouver Island. And it's said that at the beginning of time, this great sea monster came out of the ocean and transformed into a human. And there are variations on the same mask. One depicts the creature with a crystal on its forehead, and when it's danced, we put a little flashlight underneath so that it glows with the power that the creature was supposed to have. In the other example, as the creature comes ashore, there's a man, a human, dancing on the back. And this, again, is an indication of transformation. So the monster eventually goes back into the sea, but leaves the human ancestor on the beach, and he proceeds to build a house and found a tribe of people known as the Numgis in this case.
Okay. Now, we just talked about how large these masks are, but there is an exhibit here in the middle of the room that is the largest here, isn't it, as a whole? Explain this one to us. It looks kind of spooky.
Well, it's a very dramatic presentation, and it shows 8 people in a canoe. These are a tribe of Tlingit people from southeastern Alaska who were blown offshore by a storm. And when they finally made landfall, they came into stranger territory and approached a village where there was a potlatch, dance ceremony taking place. And they went inside, and it is said that they were so surprised and so amazed by what they saw that the actual encounter was then reenacted in the form of the dance. And I think you can sense the look of amazement and surprise on the faces of the characters in the canoe. The canoe, of course, is surrounded by 3 killer whales that are sort of swimming alongside. And the largest of these, the dancer, bends at a right angle from his hips and holds the mask on his back. He manipulates a lever that inside causes the dorsal fin to move up and down, and accordingly the fluked tails move as well. The lower jaw is articulated, and at its best they have a tube inside, and they filled with eagle down, and they blow the eagle down, and it comes out of the blowhole as if it were a plume of water.
Oh, wow. Well, Peter, thank you so much for taking us on this tour today of the exhibit at Gilcrease Museum. And it's called the Masks of the Northwest Coast, right? And you're one of the 3 curators of it. You've done an absolutely wonderful job here.
Thank you. and
And we hope you've enjoyed the tour of the exhibit at the Gilcrease Museum, the Masks of the Northwest Coast. Thank you for watching Expressions. We'll see you next week.